I'm going to install the Touratech Expedition Skid Plate on my KTM new to me 2013 Ktm1190. It's got the little plastic plate that's, well, it just keeps mud off of it. Doesn't protect anything, really. So yeah, I'm going to install the Touratech one on there and see how it goes. I picked mine up from Moto Canada. They carry a lot of Touratech gear. And excellent deal, actually, I have to say. And what it came with is the photocopies of the install sheet. Looks pretty reasonable. Torque specs, etc. The plate itself is beefy. This is a heavy, beefy plate. I'm pretty impressed with it so far. And then it came with the fastener set and the bracket set. And my plastic skid panels, I think, are over there on the shelf. And then, of course, the brace bar. The Touratech Expedition Skid Plate kit came with some basic instructions, which look good enough, but there was no inventory of nuts and bolts, but they are noted here, though. So there is an inventory. If you go through each item you have to do, it tells you how many of each. The way to identify, like the M8 by 20, this is metric. So the M8 by 20 is, it's the actual thread part. The neck of the bolts is 8 millimeters wide, and the 20 is the underside of the head to the tip. So if you were to take a caliper and you can just measure them, you can identify which is which might be the easiest way, just to confirm it. It's pretty easy though. There's only so many bolts here, so yeah, it makes it a little easier to understand what's going on. So a note on the Touratech fasteners that came with it, with the kit. Everything is a hex Allen key metric, compared to what you'll be taking off the bike are your internal torque 40s, and I think it's a 30 and a 40 are the common ones. But also it's, it's like this is a 10 mil socket. So you'll be using Allen keys to put the Touratech stuff on with some thread lock. This is the layout of the brackets for the skid plate. So you can see this is your left-hand side of the bike when you're sitting on the bike. This goes under the left-hand foot peg. This goes under the right-hand foot peg. This one here bolts straight up underneath the bottom of the motor, as you can see right there. This piece here goes actually where the factory plastic little protection plate was. It goes onto those two mounts, as you can see right here. And then you have these bars, which will go on the inside, on both sides of the motor, or in the frame, I should say, up front. And then there's a back plate that'll come back and then bolt through those holes there to support that, of course. So that's the general makeup. So foot peg's got to come off. That's probably one of the biggest pains of the whole install. Part of the install for the skid plate requires pulling off the foot pegs. And then this support bracket here, quite beefy, nice thick stainless steel support bracket. It'll go underneath the foot peg mount between it and the frame, and longer bolt supplied will go through. But I've watched a few videos on taking the foot pegs off the 1190s and 1290s, and I think they were 1290s. So this one looks a little different because you can see this spring here rests just compression. It just sits there and pushes against that bolt, but I have to get those two bolts out that are underneath to get the base off. So I have to pop the cotter pin out, hold on to the foot peg carefully, tap the center slide pin out, and then take those two bolts off. Add this in between, put the longer bolts that came with the kit in, and then remount this, which is going to be tricky using, from what I've seen, the screwdriver trick that people use looks pretty good. Okay. One of the tricks from some of the good videos guys have put out there for taking the foot pegs off of KTMs, or any motorcycle really, but is to undo this 8 millimeter bolt that goes onto the rear brake pedal and just leave it hanging. And this lets this pull up out of the way so it's not down here, as you have to get this pin popped up. You need room for this pin to come out as well. So hopefully I won't have to take this off. I don't think I will. If anything, I might tie it up completely with a piece of string. So here's the foot peg popped out from its bracket. Do yourself a favor. Use a grinder and just nip off the cotter pin and just pull it out freely. Otherwise, you'll be chasing that pin around. It's not worth it. And you don't want to reuse it anyway, so you want a fresh cotter pin. But on the dirt bike models, these springs actually can hook into the frame, and then the other spring hooks onto a little indent. But on the 1190, it doesn't. It just kind of free floats through the pin. The pin will go through the spring, and then one end of the spring here butts up and pushes on the foot peg, and the other end of the spring just butts up and pushes against the bolt here. So you don't have to worry about trying to hook this in or hook this over something. It doesn't sit like that. And there it is there with the pin. So literally just nip off your cotter pin, pull the cotter pin pieces out, and just hold on to it and wiggle it. And I used a simple pair of pliers just to grab the top of it here. And just as I took tension off and wiggled it, it just slid right out. Didn't have to do anything special with that brake pedal except for keeping it on, just disconnecting it, and it was just pushed out of the way. So for the right-hand side of the bike, I've got the bracket off to the bare frame, and the Touratech support bracket is going to go onto the frame first, and then you'll have this go on the outside, the foot peg bracket, and then the larger M8, 8mm wide by 20 mils long thread is going to replace the factory bolts. I'm going to use a little blue Loctite on that just to make sure it snugs up, and then get them bolted up. Just to note, when you're putting that right side bracket on, the bracket curves forward, of course, and when you put your foot peg brackets on, don't put them upside down. So you can do it wrong. You don't want these wings on the high side. You want the pinholes where your foot peg pin's going to go through on the low side. So make sure you don't put that upside down. That'd be an awful pain in the ass if you have to take it apart again. One thing to note with the Touratech fasteners, these new M8x20s, they stick out further. The factory ones actually were almost flush. I don't think it's going to be an issue because as I get my foot peg in here, it seems to just clip up underneath that lower bolt. And then I can see that my alignment seems to work. It just aligns. So it's very tight, but the foot peg just sits flat, so it's gonna sit flat, and then it's meant to fold up, which won't it should interfere with the pivot, but it is really tight though. It's I'm sure it'll go. They wouldn't have sold it this way if it didn't. Also, getting the spring in here is pretty tricky because the spring doesn't clip on the frame side, nor does it clip on the pedal side. It floats inside with the pin that goes through it, and it's just in compression, so it's going to be trickier than I think some of the videos I've seen to get in. Okay, so the foot peg was actually pretty easy to get in. You have to fiddle with it quite a bit, but using one of these socket screwdriver style socket drives it's perfect. It's the perfect OD. It's better than a Phillips screwdriver, etc. So if you've got one of these handy, I suggest using it. If not, a screwdriver will work. So maybe the Phillips screwdriver gives you more room to wiggle it in, but anyways, what I had to do was I had to set the foot peg up under that protruding bolt I had showed that the lower bolt head. I lined that up first. Then I took this spring and just pushed it with my thumb, and just kept pushing and pushing and wiggling it with my thumb with my right hand, and with my left hand I worked this in and hooked it and worked it and just wiggled it all until it got in there. So now it's ready for me to now reverse in the pin while sliding this backwards, as I've seen some guys do in the videos. Great trick. I'll slide this out backwards while I'm sliding the pin butted up against it, and it should go fine. So here's the Touratech bracket on the right side in with the longer M8x20 Touratech bolt heads, which have they protrude a bit further, and you can see the position of the spring, and it doesn't flush up as much as it did with the original bolt head hardware. I'll show you on the other side. As you can see here, it sits a bit more flush, and the factory ones, well, they stick out a bit, but I think the Touratech ones stick out a bit more. But the spring seems to snug in there a bit better. It doesn't make any difference. It still seems to be working just fine on the other one. But it just to compare them. And yes, this video sucks because I'm using my phone and a flashlight and everything. So haters can hate me on the comments. Go for it. Just show you how on this the pin lines up as I pull that screwdriver or the socket drive out, and I'll just slide this pin forward at the same time and just keep wiggling it. It should go in fine. If I had an extra arm, I could show you it live, but I can't. It went in pretty much as easy as the videos of the other guys have done showed. I just got it started, put my right hand with thumb over the pin and just wiggled it down, pushing with my thumb while grabbing onto this, wiggling it a bit as well, and then working back that socket drive here. And yeah, it slid through pretty good. Now I've got to put the washer back on, of course, and then a cotter pin. And get a good cotter pin. Don't use a piece of baling wire, things like that can rust out, and then you don't want to lose the washer and have this possibly rattle free in the bush. That would suck. Yeah. After the foot pegs are done with the brackets that go down the sides, added in behind the foot peg mount, so I've done it for both sides. Now it's this bracket here, bolts up, it goes up and goes flush on here, and there's been a set of small bolts with these are those little sealing nuts. They've got a vinyl film on the inside to lock them, so you don't need to put thread lock on these. I'll do that next. Okay, after I put on the fasteners that came with the Touratech plate for this main bracket, which takes all the weight. I mean, it's the bracket that goes right up here under the motor. And it had these really cheap little screws, and just didn't sit with me, because the factory screw that came out of it is a typical KTM, decent fastener. I bought off eBay. I bought a couple of KTM fastener kits, and I found just what I need. It doesn't matter if it's a bit longer because it just goes through one end of the other. So I'm going to use good old KTM factory style fasteners because they fit through, and these are just ridiculous. The nuts barely fastened onto the bolt. So I highly recommend, if you get one of these expedition kits, get yourself, it is like $10-15 for a box of KTM style fasteners. They might not be the true ones. I've got a box of $80 box Canadian of fastener kit I bought at the dealer, but I also bought a small $15 box off eBay from China that they'll better than those. That's all I can say. And it comes with a washer to go on either side of the bolts. But by the time I'd put this washer on, there's barely enough to get a bite on there. Plus, I don't see the need for washers, really. This is going to be, it butts up pretty tight, so I'm going to pop the washer back off the other end of that bolt, get a little more bite, and then put the nut on. Okay. There's the forward-facing bracket mounted. Or I should say it's a mount itself. There's the center mount that hangs off the bottom of the block. Here's the mount that goes in behind the right foot peg. And here's the mount that went up under the left foot peg. And between those four, now the plate will fasten up onto them. Okay, the next thing I'll do after I've got these mounts on is put the rubber grommet supports in them, and that's these 6 items here. Little tapered nipple, they pop in, so they, as you can see, they pop into this front piece here, and the plate will butt up against it. The plate sits in compression against it, and there's other bolts that pull the plate onto it. So there's 2 go up onto this bottom plate here, and then the 4 will go on here. Next is these speed nuts. They actually just clip on right here onto the brackets that come off behind the foot pegs, as you can see in the image. That way when you bolt the plate up, it threads into that, so there's no need to try to get a wrench or something in the back side of that because you can't fit it in. Next is the main bracket that goes across both sides of the motor, and it actually ties in right here. There's a T45 torque for your lower crash bars. You got to take out the factory torque, and they've supplied these, and there's 4 spacers. There's 2 slightly longer ones, so the diagram only shows using 1 set of spacers. So you got the main bolt, you got a washer, and then you've got a spacer on the other side here. So and perhaps there's a different size in motor, perhaps between the S model and the R model. I don't know. I'll find out. And my cheat for the T45 torque drive, which I don't have a nice set of socket torques. I had a screwdriver set with multi-bits, and it had a T45 torque. I used this is a 1/4-inch socket out of my socket set that fits the back end of this torque. So it allows me to get a proper socket on it, and it actually is enough to get it off and on snug. So it's if you don't have a nice set of torque sockets, then that's your cheat on it. So this is the factory bolt that came off the lower crash bar mount, and this is what's going to go in with the spacer on the other side of this. So with a spacer, and let's see where that lines up at. We'll see. So I'll decide which spacer works by whatever fits. We'll see how it goes. So this main crossbar took a little figuring out. So number 1, it only goes on one way, and that's where because you can flip it around. So you want to have it so it swings down first. It goes down and then outwards, not outwards and down. You'll see, because there's only one way it'll go around this pipe where it'll line up with the other bolt on the other side. So I popped out the factory crash bar bolt, and for my Adventure 1190 S model, it might be the same for the R, but I had to use the small spacer. I can't use the large spacer. So I've got gonna put a little thread lock on it, and use the small spacer, get it up in between here, and then slide. I dry fit it all first, and that's how I figured it out, and then I'll slide the bolt through and tighten them up on both sides. And also, I put this plate up here now. That bracket will float in behind. While I had play, it was easy just to slip it in there and leave it hanging. As you can see, you'll bolt it through the holes, and it's got threaded nuts welded onto it. So it's actually molded with the threaded bolts as part of the actual bracket. Okay. Well, I've got it all fastened up. The crossbar is ready. I've got a little bit of wiggle room in it. It's not super tight yet until I get the plate on. Now, I couldn't tell if the instructions wanted me to have the plate already fastened to that crossbar before I put it on. Maybe. Anyways, I I don't think it'll be that much harder to drop it in now. I'll pull it up and line up the M16 small little bolts as well, and thread it up.